Thank you. What a well-behaved crowd. When I teach class, I don't usually get that kind of response. My name is Chris Kimball. I have the honor and joy of serving as president at Cal Lutheran, and it's my joy today to welcome all of you here to campus for this armchair conversation with Assemblymember Jackie Irwin and Tom Steyer. I have to ask, is there anybody here who is on campus for the first time? A couple of folks. Let me extend a special welcome to you. I hope it's not the last time. We're always glad to show off our campus. We believe one of the things that we are required to do, even as an independent university, is to be a public resource and to be a place where events like this can happen, along with things like volleyball camp, and if you're looking for that, that's right next door. We'll hope they'll keep the noise down a bit. But we pride ourselves on offering public events, sports, concerts, and a whole variety of things to the public to be a public resource, and we almost invariably do it without charge. So for those of you that have not been here before, we'd love to have you come back on many other occasions. Well, today you're here to listen to two very important people, and this event has been organized by Assemblymember Jackie Irwin. If I gave you her entire biography, we would use our entire allotment of time. So I'll just say a couple of personal things. Even though she is in her first term in the State Assembly and having a remarkable impact already, those of us in Thousand Oaks and the Caneo have known her for a long time. She served in our city council, served as mayor, I think was always a leading vote getter in elections, and I think it speaks to her commitment to working with all citizens across all kinds of lines that normally divide us to do good public policy. And I have to say, here at the university, we've been especially grateful for the friendship that Jackie has shown to us in the city and now statewide. While I can't claim that she or her lesser half, husband John, or her three children are any of them graduates of the university, they have been great supporters of it, and John Irwin is a member of the Board of Regents, our governing body, and therefore my boss, so don't tell him what I said about being a lesser half. Anyway, we are delighted that Assemblymember Irwin has elected to have this event here on campus this morning. We look forward to future partnerships. I will point to one happening in just a few months. On September 22nd, here at 4 p.m., we will have hearings on cybersecurity. And it's hard to think of anything that rivals the environment as an important story of our time, but cybersecurity is probably it. So we look forward to that event in the third week of September. But today we're here to hear from Assemblymember Irwin and from Tom Steyer. So with that, with great thanks and welcome, Assemblymember Jackie Irwin.
We are very happy to see such a great turnout here today, and I would like to thank Chris Kimball and Cal Lutheran for hosting today. Cal Lutheran has been wonderful throughout the years, engaging the community on important issues. I think that it's really Chris's mission to pique the intellectual curiosity of residents of Thousand Oaks, and so I'm very pleased that you allowed us to use Cal Lutheran today. And very excited that Tom Steyer was willing to address residents here in Thousand Oaks and in the greater Ventura County. He is truly one of the thought leaders in this country on clean energy and global climate change. And so we expect that this will be one of a number of speakers that we're able to get here into Ventura County. I think it's very important that residents get as educated as possible on the important issues that are facing us at the state, local, and global level. And Tom Steyer certainly brings a wealth of information. So to start off our series, I would like to tell you a little bit about today's guest. Tom is a California business leader and clean energy advocate. He was born in 1957 in New York City. He graduated from Yale University summa cum laude in economics and political science. He then attended Stanford Business School, where he became an R.J. Miller Scholar and received his MBA. Tom and his wife Catherine have 4 children. Tom founded and was a senior managing member of Therian Capital Management, as well as being a co-founder of the Oakland-based One California Bank. Currently, Tom is the president of Next Gen Climate. Tom has been a member of the Hamilton Project, a group of leading economic thinkers and policymakers since 2005. The Hamilton Project was launched as an economic policy initiative at the Brookings Institute, an organization widely regarded as the most influential think tank in the world. As a philanthropist, Tom has donated $41 million to create the Tomcat Center for Sustainable Energy at Stanford University, which focuses on the development of affordable renewable energy and the promotion of related public policies. He co-founded the Tomcat Ranch, a farm dedicated to promoting healthy eating programs at neighboring schools and promoting excuse me, healthy farm practices. He and his wife Catherine, I always say English is my second language, my first language is Dutch, so when some of those things come up, that's what I blame. He and his wife Catherine have signed a giving pledge, a commitment by wealthy individuals to dedicate the majority of their fortunes to philanthropy. Ladies and gentlemen, please help welcome my guest today, Tom Steyer. I have to say, can you hear me? Okay. I have to say it's very exciting not to be on the hot seat today. That's true.
Does that mean I'm on the hot seat?
You are on the hot seat. So we're going to go through a number of questions, and as many of you heard probably on the way, that we would love to get questions from the audience also. So anybody that has questions that they haven't turned in, we have a number of staffers right there. Jeanette with the polka dotted dress on. She will be collecting questions also, and David Moran will moderate those in a little while. So why don't we start with, can you tell us a little bit about your background and how a successful investor decided to change course to advocate for action on climate change?
Sure. Well, let me start by saying thank you very much for having me here today. It is a real pleasure to be here, and I hope that we can talk together and both learn something from this. So why did I stop investing? And let me say that I have a friend here for 30 years who was also working in the investment world, who came out to hear me. So Jeff, nice to see you. 2 reasons. And I think it's actually very appropriate that we're at Cal Lutheran University to talk about it. One was I started to go to church a lot more. And I started to think about the world more broadly, so that it included not just trying to think about things in terms of returns and economic impact, but also to try to think more broadly about what we're doing to each other in our actions, and what we're doing to the natural world, and what will that then mean for what we're doing to each other. So when this happened, I called up my mother, who was very religious, and said, you know, Mom, you're not going to believe this, but it turns out I really believe in God. And she goes, Sonny, there are a lot of people who are a lot smarter than you that believe in God. Don't be so smug. But the other thing that happened was I went on the board of Stanford University. And Stanford likes to think in grandiose terms and think that they can address the biggest problems in the world. And so it has a big board, over 30 people, and I felt like if I'm going to be a board member that contributes something, I need to think about how I can help Stanford, you know, go along its mission. And the thing that I thought, the more I studied, the more I looked at the world, the more I felt like this is the issue that confronts us. This is our generational challenge, and it's going to take a concerted effort in technology and policy and politics to figure out how to do this. And so I can contribute through Stanford and put some money into their research programs and come up with some new technology that will help us solve the energy problem. So it really was those 2 things that sort of took my focus away from just thinking about investing around the world and started to think more broadly about what are the biggest challenges that face us as Californians and as Americans, and how can we address them? And it just became something that I felt absolutely driven to do, because I felt as if there was no one else who thought this was a job. In fact, my friends like to make fun of me and say it's not a job. But I felt as if there was something that needed to be done, and that if no one else was going to do it, then I was going to give it a try. Decades. You know, the Clean Air Act and the Clean Water Act are from here. The building efficiency standards are from here. California has led the way, and people have complained that we don't know what we're doing, and then it turns out, oh my gosh, it's a really good idea, and they stop complaining. So the fact of the matter is, we've done this for decades intellectually. It has not hurt us, it's good for us. I don't think we're choosing a bad economy, I think we're choosing a much better economy. And the leadership position allows us to create those companies here, to do the tech here. If you look at where we are, we use half as much energy per capita as the rest of the country. Now, some of that is we have a pretty nice climate, but a lot of that is we have had decades of working on it, and policy, and reacting to policy, and employing technology the rest of the country just hasn't had. We've had an awareness. So when I think about why California should do this, I see this as upside. That our leadership position in us here, not only it lets us lead intellectually, which I'm actually super proud of what California stands for in the nation. And I would hate to give up that position of looking forward and trying to anticipate the future and trying to come up with solutions. I'm extremely proud of what we're doing that. I would hate to give that up. But I also feel like economically, it'll be really good for us. I think the fact of the matter is, when I've spent some time talking to people from around the world about what they think about climate. And the issue around the world in terms of people working on climate, overwhelmingly, is the United States of America. The United States is less than 5% of the world, less than 1 in 20 people. We have over half the climate deniers. So when you go around the world and talk about what we all need to do, their answer is, are you guys willing to do it? You know, we're traditionally the biggest carbon emitters. Now China's much bigger than us, but over time it's been us. And they're very worried about where we stand as a country. Are we, you know, do we understand, do we accept the problem? Are we really willing to work on it? So in this case, I really feel as if there's going to be a big climate UN convention in December in Paris. And believe it or not, there are 193 countries in the UN. And they're very, very interested in what President Obama's going to do, and the United States. But believe it or not, they're very, very interested in what Governor Brown is going to say and what California's doing. We have a global role in terms of talking about what can be done, what it looks like economically if you do the right thing, and kind of a progressive voice in America. So when I think about this, I'm very proud, honestly, of our stepping up on this. And I'll now answer, we're putting in, there are a couple bills in front of the legislature now to extend the energy rules that came in 2006 through 2030. And there's been a question, you know, what happens if they go wrong? You know, what happens if they're too much? You know, should there be an off-ramp so that along the way you can turn off the highway and, you know, go to the rest stop? And my reaction to that is, there's always an off-ramp. You know, we're not going to abolish the legislature. We're not going to run without a governor. If there's something that is going wrong, we always have the ability to change any legislation or adapt it or make it better. And in fact, that's the job of a legislature and of a governor, to make sure that what's going on still makes sense. So I think it's true in any legislation that if you put in a big comprehensive legislation, I think traditionally people have tinkered with it to try and make it better. And that's totally sensible. So I don't think there's really a specific need here to say, gosh, this looks so ambitious. If it doesn't work, what are we going to do? If it doesn't work, we're going to change it.
And can you talk a little bit about how the state's current policies have affected the economy, and what about prices of fuel compared to the rest of the country?
Well, I think that since we've put in the cap and trade, we've been growing faster than the rest of the country, and we've been creating jobs faster than the rest of the country. So in terms of our energy policies, I feel as if we're doing fine. We're doing better than other people. We're actually back to being the big job creator, and it's happened since cap and trade went in. I think the question about fuel, it's really a question of what you mean by fuel, whether you mean transportation fuel.
Transportation or electric.
So let's talk about transportation for one quick second, because we pay a lot more than the rest of the country for gasoline. And it's honestly a little shocking to me. And I don't really understand it. We get into intermittent shortages where the price of gas goes up a lot. And in those shortages, it turns out that the refining companies make a peck of money. And I don't really understand that. So in terms of transportation fuels, we should be addressing that or examining it to understand why that's going on. We paid $1 billion more as a state per month in terms of gasoline money out for the first few months of this year than if we had the average of the United States of America. I don't understand that. That's just a ton of money, and it's something, that I'm really hoping is going to be understood, because it's been going on for more than a decade. We keep getting into these shortages, and in California, for people who are working families or moderate income, $1 a gallon is a ton. They're spending a lot of time on the road, and they don't have a lot of, someone really wants to call into this meeting. And they don't have a lot of extra money. So that is something that I don't understand, and I really think needs to be addressed. In terms of energy, because we use half as much energy per capita, our energy bills are lower than the rest of the country. And people like to point to price per kilowatt hour, and it's really important. But the fact of the matter is, our energy bills are lower than other places, and they're only going to get lower. I mean, from my point of view, we are in a place where we have an ability to create secure, independent energy in the United States that's going to be cheaper than we can get from anywhere else, and we can pioneer this around the world. That, to me, is just an amazing opportunity. So I look at this and I think, if we're going to be the leaders of technology, if we're going to drive technology, and this is going to be a technology business, this is going to be great for us, both on a cost basis per kilowatt hour, on a bill basis in terms of what people's bills are, and also in terms of creating jobs and economic opportunity for working people.
And why, from your perspective, is it so important to pass SB 32 and SB 350 this year? And how do you respond to the oil companies saying that it's not possible to reduce our coal and rely half?
So let me just say what those are. 50% of our electricity will be generated through renewables by 2030. We'll have a 50% improvement in building efficiency by 2030, and we will use 50% less gasoline as a state by 2030. And basically, when you look at this, those together will put us on a glide path to 2050 to where everybody says we have to get. So it's not something that is, some extreme thing. We're actually simply dealing with what the scientists tell us we have to do by 2050 and getting us there in a way that we don't have to wait to the last second. I mean, I analogize this whole work of changing our energy to a marathon. We're not getting off fossil fuels tomorrow. That's ridiculous. I bet 90% of the people here probably drove here in an internal combustion car. I did. All of us are in a society that includes a lot of fossil fuel energy today. And it's not going to change tomorrow, and we know that's impossible, and we think it's really important that we do this in a way that preserves prosperity and working for all Americans and all Californians. Our lives differently, and that's going to save a lot of gasoline too. So when someone tells me, and someone who's absolutely 100% self-interested tells me it's impossible to do something when we're probably, based on what's on the books, somewhere about 80% of the way there, I don't believe it. Because I think over 15 years, Californians are going to come up with ways that are going to be surprising. And we're going to come up with ideas that are going to be better than anyone has thought of at this point. I mean, I always say to people, look, in 1983, they broke up Mondale. In 1996, they deregulated communication. In 1983, my parents had a rotary phone and a black and white TV. No one had ever heard of the internet. All the things that have happened subsequently they weren't in anyone's imagination. So the ability of us to innovate is so much more than anyone gives us credit for. As a country, as a state, as a people. So when someone tells me we can't do it and we're already 80% of the way there, based on what's on the books, I say, I don't believe that for a second. And I also think this is a question of we have to give ourselves these bogeys. It's not a question of like, this would be a nice thing to do. These are things that, as a state, we actually have to do. And if we can do it, and if we can lead the way, that is going to be great for us. And so if we set ourselves a target that's 20% above what's already on the books, I think that's completely logical. And I think if we challenge ourselves, we'll surprise ourselves with our capabilities, we'll surprise ourselves with our innovation, and at the end of it, we'll look back and think, wasn't that fantastic?
So just for everybody that doesn't follow totally what's happening at the state level, these are the governor's goals that he set at the beginning of the year, and these two bills are to implement the governor's goals. SB 32 happens to be carried by our local senator, Farron Pavley, and she has two of her staffers here, Marie and Henry Stern. And Henry has written a lot of SB 32. So anybody that has questions on that, go after Henry after. Raise your hand, Henry. And I have just one last question before we get questions from the audience. What do you see as the biggest challenge to overcome in order to address climate change at the state, federal, and international level?
Well, one of the things that I definitely didn't understand at the onset of this effort for me, which has been going on for about 10 years, was the difference between policy and politics. Because I thought that the way things were accomplished was basically that people thought through what the best idea was, and they had kind of an intellectual conversation, and there was a Socratic dialogue, and at the end of it, you had a great answer. And it turns out, who knew? That there's a huge political process. And the political process includes a lot of organization and a lot of interest. And so, and with that interest comes money. So when I think about what the pushback to everything I've been saying today is, it's the fact that there are big interests that don't think these are good ideas. And there's a lot of money that doesn't think these are good ideas. And so I gave you the polling data, where basically overwhelmingly Americans agree with us and increasingly agree with us and think it's increasingly important. But in terms of getting that enacted into legislation at any level, it's really important to understand that there is what I think of as paid opposition. There are people whose interests are, whose oxes are gored, whose interests are damaged. And they're going to, democratic processes, they absolutely have a right to give an alternative point of view, to argue strongly, and to spend money against it. And when we think about this, if this were a polite college debate, we would have settled this a long time ago. But because it is actually a fractious democracy with a lot of separate interests, it's going to take organization, it's going to take continual attention, and that's why actually I stopped working as an investor, at all, because I feel as if it's important for us as a society, and I view this honestly as our generational challenge, and I think that everybody is going to end up, and I've always thought this, in California and across the country, feeling as if we can solve this problem. This is our problem, but it's also our opportunity to make a big contribution, and we can all feel what other generations have felt when they solve their biggest problems. Systems that are smarter, that take care of us and let us live in a good way, at the same time that we're trying to make sure that so that's what I think of as dealing with the symptoms of what's going on, and also deal with the cause of what's going on. We're gonna have to do both, and no getting around it.
Okay, thank you. Go on to another one here, and you said you've been at this for about 10 years now. So we've certainly seen the public's mood change, but is there some good data about the American public's attitude towards climate change? What else needs to be done to affect that attitude?
Well, I cited the polling data, and this gets polled. We do some of it, but it gets publicly polled. The polls I cited, a lot of them were Wall Street Journal, Stanford University, NBC, this gets polled to death. And believe me, in a presidential election year, this is gonna get polled beyond death. So we're gonna get great data. The other thing that I really think is true in thinking about climate is how people actually relate to it. Because the fact of the matter is, people don't relate to climate change. I always say, most Americans did not like 11th grade science class, and it was mandatory. This is not mandatory. So they really are not interested in listening. What they're interested in hearing about is, why is this a human issue and a local issue? So if you say to people in California, at high tide now, because of sea rise, salt water runs down the street of Miami Beach. Californians are vaguely interested. Vaguely. If you say to people in Miami that in California we have a 6% snowpack, they're vaguely interested. What people are interested in is, how does this affect me, my family, and the people I love? And so the fact of the matter is, the way that people react to this and respond to it is thinking about, how does it affect the health of my family? One of the things that's true about this is 3.3 million Californians have asthma. We have really high asthma rates. In the LA County, between 1 in 4 and 1 in 5 kids has childhood asthma because of the air quality. That is something that families really relate to. To the extent it impacts employment in their area, specific jobs that someone they know or they could get, that's something they really care about. Any of the bad things that would happen in their area that would impact the economy or the way that they think about living. So people who live up in the Sierra who love to ski, that's something they really care about. That's a visceral thing. So when you think about how Americans respond to this, it's a global problem. But the fact is, they respond only on a local human basis. And so unless you can bring it home directly to where they live and who they are, you're not really talking to them. You're talking at them, and they're going to tune you out very, very fast.
Thank you. Tom, you mentioned earlier the electrification of the auto industry, but can you broaden that and talk about just overall energy use and how to improve energy efficiency, transform the fuel profile, because there's commercial industries that use a large amount of fuel and contribute to greenhouse gas emissions. What are some of the other things that can happen?
Jackie, so anytime you want to chime in. One of the things that I think is people don't realize, I think everybody thinks that this is going to be a gadget revolution. That, we're going to get an electric car with a better battery. That we're going to, put windmills up. That it's going to be something that you can see that is a traditional kind of piece of metal that's going to change everything. And actually, one of the things that I don't think people have got their minds around is how much of this is going to be software. There is a lot of this is us being smarter, collecting a massive amount of data and using it better. So let me give you an example. One of the things that's true about solar and wind is they're so-called intermittent. Solar, I know you guys don't know this, but the sun does not shine at night, and the wind does not always blow, and therefore if you're 100% reliant on either of those energy sources, then there's certain times when they're not available. So therefore either you have to store it or you have to use another energy source. So one of the things that you can do about this is if you have a very good grid that's interactive, you can basically, at the times when there's a huge demand for energy, you can turn down people's appliances a couple degrees. You can turn down everybody's refrigerators a couple degrees in a way that they'll never notice and use the energy somewhere else. And then when the demand for energy goes down, you can move the refrigerator back and do slight adjustments all around the system and even out the amount of energy that you need at a given time, and therefore make renewables cover a bigger amount of the load. In terms of office buildings, I think people tend to think about HVAC systems. They think about the air conditioning and the heating systems. Actually, one of the things that's going to be true in office buildings, both for lighting and for heating, is going to be that we're going to end up with sensors that are going to be using the energy on a much better basis. We waste so much energy, and they're basically going to be hooked into the system so we don't waste the energy. So that the efficiency becomes not just that we use energy more intelligently, we use less because we're going to cut out the waste. And so when I think about the way this is going to work, it's going to work in ways, a lot of unseen ways, where it's really going to be about us being a smarter society with more data, using it better. And if there's anything that California should do well, that's it. That kind of thinking, bringing that kind of technology to the problem, that is something that is right down our alley. So I look at this and I think a lot of this is going to be surprising, and it's going to be in numbers. I have a friend who's a physicist. 2 physicists started a company basically to do energy efficiency in office buildings and universities. And they don't go out and buy HVAC systems. They put sensors everywhere and figure out how it's getting used, and then figure out how to use less, how to be aware of it, and when it isn't needed. And they think they can solve it. If people haven't done anything, they can reduce usage without any expense other than the sensors and a smart system, 40%. Those are numbers. It's not incremental. The stuff we can do is dramatic. And I think it's going to be a lot of people like that. Those are 2 smart guys. There are a lot of smart guys in this state, in this country.
Thank you. Jackie or Tom, obviously a lot of people in our audience are very much involved in their communities, and they're interested to know what can be done differently to gain more success in electing more environmentally supportive candidates.
Madam?
I look back to my time locally here on the city council, and as I mentioned in one of my questions to Tom, we have done a lot at the local level that I think residents can emulate. So we've put up the solar arrays at the wastewater plant. We're using cogeneration there. We've done a lot of workshops to encourage residents to use alternative energy themselves. Most of our vehicles in the city of Thousand Oaks are alternative energy. So we're setting a good example, and we're showing in Thousand Oaks that you can be very pro-environmental. This is for as conservative as the city is, it's a very pro-environmental city, very much into alternative energy and very much into open space. And so I think if you show that you can have those type of values without costing the economy, I think you're much more, show by example, I think you're much more likely to get support from residents for those type of policies.
Tom, would you like to add anything about how to elect more environmentally supportive candidates?
Well, I think the argument against people who are in favor of progressive energy policies is always a knee-jerk phrase, which is job-killing energy types. And I think that when you think about getting elected as somebody who's pushing progressive energy ideas, the key points are to talk about jobs and at least break even on it. You cannot let that go unchallenged. It's absolutely critical to point out that from a job standpoint, this should be good. The health argument, I think you've got to talk about the health of citizens, particularly with kids. But this is something where we have a chance to make significant advances in the health of the kids in our community. And lastly, I haven't heard people doing this, and I don't know whether it will work, but having looked at these cost curves over the last month, it's got me so jazzed up that the opportunity to talk about being able to create cheaper energy and therefore to create an opportunity for companies to have lower costs and for citizens to have lower costs is something else that I find very exciting. But I know that the two, jobs, health, and the last one that I think people respond to in California, and I've co-chaired a couple of propositions statewide on this, is Californians are very angry about the idea that money can run politics. They really hate that. And if there's ever a sense that money has come in and gotten an advantage over the average citizen, that basically it's hijacked the democracy, to use a bit of a cliche, but it's basically we're not allowed to be the democracy that we all grew up thinking we were and want us to be. If people get a sense of that, they get very angry.
Okay, thank you. Can you comment on companies like Patagonia, which I think has a policy of 1% for the environment? So companies like that are sort of challenging the throwaway economy. What are your thoughts?
I love Patagonia. I'm not kidding you. I don't know if you guys are aware of it. I mean, I think everybody knows the jackets, but I don't know if people understand what a fantastic company it is, how great its founder is, really the culture that it brings. I consider it to be really outstanding and worth emulating. I'm so impressed with the people in that company, the products they produce, and the way they relate to each other and the world. I just think it isn't, I said I basically tried to broaden my view after being an investor for a long time and think there's more to this world than this view. And I think those guys take a very broad view of impact on the world and the people in the world. And I'm just so, I'm very, very respectful of the job they do and the way they do it.
Okay, great. This may be a quick one also. Who do you see as some of the global allies who are helping with the leadership in fighting greenhouse gas emissions?
First of all, the people that everyone worries about in this is China. So we should address China. And I went over probably in February or March and spent a week talking to ministers of energy and economy in China, which I'd done once before in 2011. There's a dramatic change. I'm sure everybody knows this, but the air quality in China is horrible. So in Beijing, it's the equivalent of smoking 2 packs a day. It takes approximately 9 years off your life. And this is not something that happens to poor people in China. The leaders of China live in Beijing. Their children live in Beijing. The people of China are furious about it. It's not something that can be, right now, traditionally, for the last 30 years, China has had one goal: economic growth. And in 2011, when I asked the leaders, would you sacrifice some of that growth for a better climate, for better energy, for a better environment? They basically were very polite, but they never answered the question. In 2015, there's no doubt, they have 2 goals. They need to get the environment under control, including greenhouse gases very definitely, and they need growth. And they're willing to, they're equivalent goals because they cannot have a populace that's as angry as it is, that can't breathe, that can't go outside, whose kids can't play outside, and where people are sick. So when we think about global leadership, I think the Chinese are going to, they've made a promise from Paris of what they're willing to do, I think everybody thinks they're going to way outperform their promise. I think that Europe obviously is a place where people are very focused on this as well, and I've been over there, and the 6 leading oil companies in Europe have called for a carbon tax. They've said, you know, we know this is happening, we want to be decent corporate citizens, we feel this is the appropriate answer, so Shell, BP, Total, all, you know, the 6 largest oil companies in Europe have come out and said this is the appropriate policy. And I'll say one last thing. So last week I was in Africa. I went for a UN conference on financing sustainable energy, but I also visited a school that some friends of mine sponsored for girls. So very poor Kenyan girls between the ages of 15 and 18, 4 hours from Nairobi, incredibly poor. You know, living in houses, I visited 2 of the girls' houses, living in houses without running water and electricity. They were incredibly small, had cook stoves, cook fires in the house, like an old-fashioned with a hole in the thatch roof. #1 top climate change. It was incredible. They are basically migratory cattle herders, and there's a gigantic drought, so that the place is turning into a desert. So if you're a migratory cattle herder with no water, that's scary. So this school, by far the biggest thing these girls talked about was climate change, and that's how they described it. And they were overwhelmingly concerned with it. I didn't hear another issue. So when we think about the globe, this is not something where it's a Californian concern and, you know, we're the only people around here that are worried about this. This is something that is a global concern. And that it's not just, you know, the fancy people at Oxford University who are thinking about this. These are absolutely dirt poor, wonderful young women in Kenya. But these are people who probably, you know, don't have $1 a day for sure. And they're absolutely focused on it and trying to figure out what to do and talking about it all the time.
All right, Tom, this will probably have to be our last question. There's a lot of great questions. I'm sorry we couldn't get to them all. This question is from someone that says, as a CLU alum and the latest addition to Advanced Energy Economy, founded by your philanthropy, thank you so much for speaking and for the job. Please talk about your motivations and visions for helping us start AEE. You have 1 minute.
Do I have that big amount? Come on. Advanced Energy Economy is a state-by-state membership organization, nonpartisan for businesses. And the whole point was, in America, we don't change big economic things without a business voice. We don't ask the society to change without asking business people, can we do this responsibly? Can we do it effectively? Can we do it successfully? And so we wanted to organize businesses by state so they could go in and make the case for what was possible, but the best way to do it. So for instance, to talk to PUCs about how to incent utilities to do the right thing to get clean energy. And so I am actually the guy who runs it is a wonderful guy, the former mayor of Fort Wayne, Indiana. We're in 26 states. The idea is to have a local business voice talking about why advanced energy is the right way to go and what are the policies that will support it and why that'll be good for employment, why that'll be good for prosperity, and maybe the local community. So that's what AEE is, and I honestly feel as if it was necessary, and the guys running it have done a very, very good job.
Well, unfortunately, we do have to wrap this up. I'm going to turn it back over to Assemblymember Irwin. I'd like to thank you, Tom, and I'd also like to compliment you on the tie. I think the red and dark tie is very handsome. With that, I'll turn it over to
Especially nicely with the beaded belt. No, I want to just thank everybody for coming today and hope that you learned something. As I said, we're going to be trying to do a series of days where we can bring people that are experts in their fields, real passionate about their issues into the county so that you can learn something more about what's going on. We also hope to see some of you back on September 22nd. We're actually going to be having a assembly hearing here at CLU on cybersecurity, which, as President Kimball said, is a very timely subject with all the breaches that we're hearing about lately. And I have a number of my staff people around here. I think I've had them wave their hands already. We are, right now our office is in Camarillo. We have an office in Oxnard. And we want to make sure that you know we are here to serve the residents, do a good job of constituent services. We have a number of issues, a number of events that are coming up. The Military and Veterans Expo on August 15th in Camarillo, Senior Scam Workshop in War Park in Oxnard, a Coastal Cleanup Day at Ormond Beach, and many other events. So if you're interested in learning about what we're doing at the district office, you can give us your email address on the way out. And if you have any issues with things that are going on at the county level or the state level, please contact our office. We've been doing a really good job with constituent services. We really aim to be a leader on those issues. So you'll be able to get that information from any of my staffers. And again, I am really grateful first to David for moderating, and then truly, Tom, thank you so much for coming out to Ventura County and giving us some of your wisdom. We really
Totally fine. Thank you.